Cambuskenneth Abbey, which stood in Clackmannanshire at the time it was built, but is now in Stirlingshire, lies within sight of Stirling Castle and the National Wallace Monument. Situated 1 mile northeast of Stirling on the north banks of the River Forth, the abbey was founded by David I around 1147, and at the time came under the Diocese of Glasgow. The Augustinian monks who lived and worked there had travelled to Scotland from Artois in the Artois region of France. In all, the Augustinians had 28 monasteries in Scotland, more than any other denomination. Within Stirling itself, there were also Dominican and Franciscan monks. The abbey, which was vast in its day, was sometimes called the Monastery of Stirling, Stirling Abbey, or the Church of St Mary's at Cambuskenneth, as it became known in 1201, and was dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. The first abbot of Cambuskenneth was Alfredus, and as such he was in charge of overseeing the administration of the vast estates owned by the abbey, and dealt with the income from the local tenant farmers. His status was on a par with a feudal lord, and this remained the case until 1552. Other abbots of historical note include Henry, who was raised to the office of High Treasurer of Scotland, having been involved in an embassy in England for a time. Although he didn't hold that office for long, he was abbot for 30 years and died in 1502. He was succeeded by David Arnott, then Patrick Painter or Panther followed. He was reckoned to be one of the most accomplished scholars of the age. He became secretary to James IV, then a member of the Privy Council. He was also appointed precentor to Alexander Stewart, the king's son, who went on to become Bishop of St Andrews. When James V succeeded his father, he threw Panther into jail for treason, but there was no evidence of this, so he was freed. He became chargé d'affaires in the French court, where he died in 1519. Alexander Milne followed, who was later the first president of the Court of Session. David Panther became commendator or lay administrator in 1549, but in 1552 he became Bishop of Ross and left. At the time of the Reformation, a charter dated 30th June 1562 granted the lands and abbey to John Erskine, Earl of Mar. That same year, Adam Erskine became commendator until 1608, followed by Alexander Erskine, third son of John, Earl of Mar. The Erskines held the lands of Cambuskenneth Abbey until 1700, when Stirling Town Council acquired them on behalf of Cowan's Hospital, when Sir John Erskine of Alva House, as well as others, signed them over. In the inventory of the title deeds, there was an instrument of Sasson in favour of Charles Erskine, the eldest son and heir of Thomas Erskine of Cambuskenneth, dated 16th April 1673. The lands, as well as fishing rights, ended up being sold on 29th August 1709 by Sir John Erskine of Alva to the Master of Cowan's Hospital. In 1785, John Francis Erskine, 7th Earl of Mar, regained the fishing rights on the River Forth at Cambuskenneth. It was said that when the Erskines took over, they removed some of the stones from the abbey and used them to build Mar's Wark at the top of Broad Street in Stirling. What was left was the 70-foot tower, which was repaired by the patrons of the hospital. They also repaired the old doorway to the churchyard, but little else remained of what was once a substantial building. The abbey was the site of some important events in Scottish history. The name Cambuskenneth means creek or field of Kenneth, named after King Kenneth MacAlpine. Kenneth II made this the rendezvous point to avenge his father, Malcolm I's death in 954. Over the years, English marauders have attacked the abbey. During the reign of David II, it was pillaged, losing most of its valuable furniture and books, vestment, cups and ornaments on the altar. To recompense the loss, the Bishop of St Andrews, William de Landel, granted to the community the vicarage of Clackmannan. Edward I is said to have prayed there, and in 1308 Sir Neil Campbell and Sir Gilbert Hay, among others, met there and entered into an agreement to defend their liberty and their country, as well as Robert Bruce's claim to the throne, which they swore before the great altar. 4 years earlier, at the Feast of St Barnabas, a secret agreement was made between Robert Bruce and William Lamberton, Bishop of St Andrews, in which it was decided Bruce would rise in rebellion against English power in Scotland. Bruce held his first parliament at the abbey, following the Battle of Bannockburn in June 1314, and 12 years later, many of Scotland's nobles swore fealty to David, Robert Bruce's son and heir apparent there. In 1383, the abbey was burned down by English troops. In 1559, the monastery was ripped apart by the Reformation, and with only a few monks left, it closed, its buildings being demolished and its lands forfeited to the Crown. During excavations in 1864, the remains of James III, who was killed at the Battle of Sochieburn on 11th June 1488, and his wife Margaret of Denmark, who'd predeceased him, were discovered. She'd died at Stirling and had been buried near the high altar in February 1487. They were carefully reinterred and a memorial stone was erected by the order of Queen Victoria. William Mackesson, the town architect of Stirling, and his team also discovered the graves of monks at the side of the chancel and repaired the bell tower while they were there. The design of the 13th century 3-storey high bell tower with its lancet windows is unlike any other ecclesiastical tower in the country. It was restored in 1865, with the carved faces below the parapet, possibly dating back to the time of its construction. In a quiet spot near the tower are said to be buried the remains of William Wallace's arm. Following his execution in London in August 1305, parts of his body were sent to various parts of the country, including Stirling. The foundations of the abbey can be viewed at any time, but the tower is only accessible by arrangement. Near the remains, an orchard has been established, a nod to the former orchard that once fed the abbey and the locals. When visiting, please be aware there are some cows roaming near the abbey. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.